Hey fellow gliders, welcome back. I'm Robert Petito, and in this video we're going to take a look at a method that might allow you to replace an entire table with a singular cell. So if your app is starting to run up against your row threshold for your allotted plan, this method might allow you to eliminate that problematic table altogether. Let's take a look. So in this sample app, we have a list of inventory items. These items happen to be some generic Apple products with a description and a price. And maybe we're allowing our users to select their favorite items from the list. There are a few ways to make that happen depending upon the functionality that you would like to have in your app. Now, the goal is to keep your app as lean as possible. So one way to keep the app lean and allow for a favorites list, let's say, would be to use a user-specific column. So here I have a user-specific favorite column. It's a Boolean column, and we can allow our users to check a box or toggle a switch or push a button that ends up checking this item, and then we can create a filtered collection of just the favorited items for the user. And this would work just fine if we only wanted to allow our users to see their own favorites. But the moment you want to make your app sort of social and allow users to see another user's list of favorites, this won't work because, again, this column is user specific. So in order to socialize your app a bit and provide this functionality, one method that many Glide users choose to do is creating a separate table altogether. So in this case, they might create a favorites table. In this favorites table, we can create some functionality that writes the user ID and the item ID that's being favorited to a new record here in the favorites table. This might look something like this, where we have this collection of items, and we can add an action, and we can have a collection item action that says favorite. And this favorite is just going to be a simple add row. So we could say add row, and we're going to add a row to our favorites table. And the user ID is going to be the current user's row ID. And the item ID can be the row ID of the item. And so if I wanted to favorite some items, I can select favorite, favorite, right? And now I can favorite all of these items. And in that favorites table, we can now make a relation between the user and their list of favorites. Right? There's a variety of ways to make that happen too. But as you can see, even though this is quite functional, if you have hundreds of users favoriting hundreds of items, then suddenly this table is going to be thousands of records long, all for the sole purpose of creating a social favorites list. So, is there a better solution? Is there a way we can accomplish this exact same thing without this intermediary favorites table? Yes, there is, and it's called the Trebuchet Method. If you haven't heard of the Trebuchet Method before, then I highly recommend going to the community forum and doing a search on it. I've also created a video on this, and I'll post that in the description below. But since that time, Glide's actually come out with a couple of new features that make this method much more efficient. The Trebuchet Method is something that a fellow Glide expert and I came up with a couple of years ago that basically takes an entire table's worth of data and allows you to simplify it into a singular cell in Glide, and then create your relations based off of that value. So basically, it's another form of what's called inline arrays, where we're taking this entire set of data, and instead of viewing it as a table, we create a minified version of this. So let's say, for example, these 4 item IDs that's associated to this user, we take these item IDs, and instead of creating a record for each of those item IDs, we instead create an array of these item IDs inside of the users table or some sort of associated table. And we put it instead inside of a singular cell like this. Now, typically these items would be comma separated. We'll show you the method in just a second. But then you can see that if we're associating these 4 items with this user, then we don't need this setup anymore, which means we don't need this table anymore. And so we can take this thousands of records, eliminate them all together, and just use the users and items table for the exact same functionality. All right, so this begs the question, if we're no longer pushing a button to add a record to a table, then what's this button doing? How are we going to get a list of items to fit inside of a singular cell in Glide? Now, the previous Trebuchet method involved quite a bit of setup. It involved 6 or 7 columns and a couple of custom actions. But since the recent development in Glide, we can actually whittle down that column usage to only 3 columns. And here are the 3 columns that you'll need. Wherever you're storing the data, in this case, we want it in our users table, we're going to go ahead and create a basic multiple files column. You can use multiple images as well. Either one of these will work. Now, what's special about this column is that it's the only basic column type that creates an array. Everything else is just a raw value. Okay, so for example, if I were to add this multiple files column, and let's call this favorites. All right. What's, again, different about this basic column type is that I can't directly edit it. All of these other columns you see here in front of me are also basic column types. And if I want to, I can double click them and modify the values as I see fit. But not so with a multiple files or a multiple images column. I can't double click, I can't type into it. The only way to write to this cell is by using a file picker, an image picker, or by using a set column action. And when you do, the end result is an array. If you're not familiar with arrays in Glide, there's only a few ways to create arrays. Let me talk about this for just a second. So an array column in Glide is typically a read-only column, and it involves a list of items, let's say, in an array format. So one way to create an array of items is by using a lookup column. So I could call this, let's just call this lookup array. You don't need to create this along with me. I just want to show you this. So this is going to be a lookup, and you can look up either through a relation or for an entire table. And if I want to look up a list of all of the images, let's say, or all of the item names, right? We get this column of items. And this is what an array column looks like in Glide, where each item is inside of this pill shape. And this represents each of those items. And arrays have certain properties, like you can't directly display an array of items. If I wanted to, I would have to relate this array back to the original item, and then I could display it as a collection, let's say. But you can use arrays in a variety of ways. You can use arrays as filters. You can use arrays in relations. You can do roll-ups on arrays. So it's basically a way for you to create computations or filters or that sort of thing. So a lookup is one way to create an array. You can also create an array by using a split text column. So this is, let's call this split array. And if I use this computed split text, then you select what text you want to split. In this case, maybe my name. And you see there's that pill shape. And then you can split by a particular value. So if I split by a space, then it's going to create an array of my first name and last name. Or if I split by nothing, it's going to create an array of all the letters in my name. And then you get the idea. So that's one way to create an array. Another way to create an array is a make array column. This is one of my favorite columns because it allows you to specify the values you want in an array. So if I search for make array, you can add as many items as you'd like to the array. And you can select a raw value. You can type in a custom value. You can even select another array, right? And when you hit save, it's going to create a new concatenated array of all of the items that you've selected. So that's kind of fun. One of the last ways to create an array is by using these computed experimental array columns. So if I say experimental array, in the computed experimental array folder, you have all of these other array type items. And one way to create an array is by choosing an append array, or you can do a single element array or a unique elements array, and you can then target a specific value to create an array. This is what you had to use before the make array column came out. So I no longer really use those much in terms of creating arrays. I'll use them for sorting arrays or slicing arrays or things like that. But for actually creating arrays, I typically just rely on the make array column now. Okay, so these are all ways to create arrays in Glide. Now, these arrays are read-only, meaning you can't edit them. You can't add items in, you can't remove items out. And they're created using these computations, right? That's why they're called computed columns. So while these are computed columns and thus read-only, again, the favorites column, this multiple files or multiple images one that you selected, is unique because it's a basic column. So it's the only column type that allows for you to write to an array column. So we're going to leverage this favorites column in order to create our Trebuchet method. All right, I'm going to clean up a little bit here and delete these unnecessary array columns. Okay, so we're left with just our multiple files favorites column. Now the question is, how do we write to this column? So again, there's three different ways. You can do an image picker, a file picker, which we don't want to use for this particular instance, or we can use the set column action. So if I go back to my layout and we want to favorite an item, right, I can change my action from an add row to the favorites table instead to a set column values. And the values we're going to set are going to be in the user profile. And we're going to set to the favorites column here. So again, we can actually write values directly to the array. Now, what are we setting? Now, logically, you'd think, okay, well, let's just set the row ID of the item inside this favorites table. But you see that we don't have those options here. And that's because the only thing that you can set into a multiple files table is another array. So we actually have to create an array on the item side that we can then use to set to our favorites. So let's go ahead and do that. So here in our items table, we're going to go ahead and create an array of the row ID that we want to add. And if you were paying attention, you'll know that the cleanest way to create an array in Glide is the make array column. So we're going to call this new array. And this will be a make array column. And the item we want to add, in this case, is the row ID. Okay, let's see what this does if we just did the row ID here. So back in our layout, we're going to go back to our collection, go to our actions, and we're going to do our set column values. And we want to set our favorites. And now we see we have the option to add our new array. So I'm going to select new array. And if I add this very first item here, I click on favorite, and then I go to my user profile table, we now see that that item exists inside of our favorites. Okay, and you see that it's an array, it's inside that pill shape. Now, if we want to add a second item, you think it would be as easy as just picking a second item here like this. However, you'll notice that our favorites column got replaced with that second item. So the mechanic of that button is to replace our list of favorites with whatever we're pressing. So that means that whenever we press a button, we want to grab the new item and our existing list of items. So that way it will know what we've already favorited and then add that item to that list. And all we have to do to make that happen is just adjust our make array column. So let's go back to our items table. Let's adjust our make array column here. And we need, yes, we want to add the row ID of the item that we want to add here, but we need to add it to our list of existing favorites. And so we can click on this triple dots here, go to user profile, and select our existing list of favorites, like that. All right, so now when we push that button, it's going to replace our list of favorites with our list of favorites and the new item. Okay, so let's try that again. Let's go ahead and push this button now, and we'll push this third one here. So now if everything worked together, we should have 3 items in our users table. And look at that, we do 1, 2, and 3. Now I bet you're thinking, okay, well, what if we push the same item more than once? Like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What does that do? Well, because we don't have any sort of logic in here, yeah, it added that item 5 more times in here. Right? And you probably don't necessarily want to do that if you're just trying to favorite something. So we have to build a mechanic to prevent that. One thing we can do is prevent this button from being pressed if it's already been favorited. And so we can come back to our actions over here, and we can adjust this button's condition to only allow you to push that button when that item doesn't exist in our list of favorites. So I'm going to add a condition here, and we're going to say we're only going to allow this when the row ID of the item doesn't include, or sorry, is not included in, then the user profile. Oh, we have to do the reverse. Okay, it doesn't let us choose an array as the second part, but it will allow us to choose as the first part. So we actually have to reverse it. So we're only going to allow favorite when the user profile's favorites does not contain then the row ID of that item. All right, so because you see that I've added those items already, right? Okay, now we can't add it as a favorite again. And if I were to push a favorite on this, we should see that button go away. There we go. So now you might be wondering, okay, what if I want to unfavorite an item and remove it from that array? Well, we're going to use the same exact mechanic. We're still going to use a set column to override our list of favorites. But instead of using a make array to add an item, we're going to use one of those computed array columns to remove the item ID from our list of arrays, and then use that value in the override. So this is the third column that we need. So here we have a new array or new item. Maybe let's rename this to array plus new item. And let's create a new column here. We'll call this array minus item. Okay, and this is going to be our computed experimental array remove element. So it's a remove element column. So if I were just to search for remove element, that's what it is. All right, so what are we removing? Well, we're removing from our user profile favorites, okay, we're going to remove the row ID of the item, like this. Okay, so this is our list of favorites right now, and we're going to remove that favorited item. And this is going to be the array that we're setting. Okay, so all we need to do then is add a second button. So back in our collection, under actions, we can add another action here, and we can call this remove favorite. And it's still going to be a set column action. And we're still going to set to the user profile row. And our favorites now is going to be the array minus item. Okay, but we only want to allow this condition when our list of favorites has the item in question. So we're going to add a condition, and we're going to allow the action when the user profile favorites includes or contains the row ID of the item. Okay, so some of our items we're allowing to favorite, some of them we have to remove favorite. Maybe we call it unfavorite, so that way it fits. Is unfavorite a word? It is now. Like that. So if I push this button, then the button should become blue again. And look at that. Okay, we can toggle back and forth here. And the beauty of this is that it uses the exact same amount of updates as if you were adding a new value to a record, right? If I were simply adding a new row, that would require me to add an update. And if I wanted to delete that item, I would use a delete row action, which would require an update. So here I'm using the same amount of updates. I'm setting and unsetting, just one value, and that's it. And the added benefit here is that unlike a user-specific column, this list of items, this list of favorites, lives on the user profile row for each user. So now that I have this list of favorites, this list of row IDs here, right? Now I can create a relation to favorites where all I'm doing is adding a relation column, and I'm relating my list of favorites to that actual item, the item's row ID. And we're going to match multiple. And then I can display this list of favorites in my profile, right? So maybe we have a new screen of users and we want to display everybody's favorited items. We can display that now in a collection with that rel favorites, right? And so if I'm viewing as David here, David can go into my profile and view that item and maybe add it as a favorite himself using that same method. So to recap, because Glide gave us this multiple files column, this Trebuchet method is much more lean and efficient. All you need is 3 columns. You need this multiple files column, you need an array of that favorites plus the new, and a column that is the remove elements, which takes that array minus the existing. And then you just use a set column action to set which one you want to do. Either you're adding or you're removing. And because of that, we can trash this favorites table altogether. So as you can see, the Trebuchet method is quite powerful, especially when you want to keep your app nice and lean without losing too much functionality. The only limitation the Trebuchet method has is that you're only keeping track of one piece of information at a time. In this case, the item ID of the item that we're favoriting. So if you want to learn how to keep track of more than just the item ID, for example, an item name, a quantity, and a timestamp, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe below for my next video where I'm going to show you how to combine the Trebuchet method with the JSON object in order to build a truly amazing experience. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave me a comment below. You can also reach out to me on Twitter @rpetito. And as always, thanks for watching.